I frequently talk about Max Meldrum. It's first referred to me by Jazz. Thank you, Jazz. And I had never run into him before, but this is so close to what we do that I thought it was worth a conversation, especially when Shawn, by way of Ron, who just bought one of those big expensive copies of the Max Meldrum Science of Appearances book, uh, uh, brought this to my attention. This demonstration, and I thought it'd be worthwhile for us to talk about it for a couple of reasons. One is that when I'm teaching, I often tell students that the two things you have is you have the great masses and they got color, and you have the effects, right? You have the points of action, and I take a mixed approach to it. But what you're seeing here with oh, and before that, with Brackman, we sort of would scrub in a few sort of gash lines. I'd say, again, like a little bit like construction drawing, but very minor and very light. And then we'd go around just putting down color notes, flick, flick, flick. A little bit like what you're going to see in this Meldrum thing. I don't do that myself. As I said, I do a mixed one, but because whatever you do, you're going to be in that world of which one am I doing and when and why would I do it that way, and so much of it is determined by what your goals are. I mean, and so the impressionist goals is meaning the ability to render that which is impressing your eye in a truth to the eye kind of a way. There are advantages to certain methods like these here. And when you draw from outlines and that sort of thing, then your goal is still in some way to do impressions. You're going to find yourself stuck between a convention and the look of nature, and that's one of those places where you have to make a decision. It was really nice for us to have Gamble as a teacher in some ways, and one was because he was a devotee of Paxton and really worked rather like Paxton. And when I was a student with him, I thought, well, this really is one of the most clear ways to go about making a picture. But after leaving Gamble, I was looking for certain things about that way wasn't accommodating what my goals were, and they didn't accomplish some of the things that the Boston School guys accomplished that became part of my sort of agenda, if you want to call it that. Remember, there's a truth and agenda, an empowering what impresses you about nature kind of an agenda. It's still all sort of in a category of impressionism. And so I began to slowly evolve a methodology. Well, everyone has to find their way, and some people call it a theory of painting and that sort of thing. You'll have to find your own way. You'll have to find your own words. Some of the words that Meldrum uses aren't my words. But among the other ways of working, well, let me jump into that in just a second. Let me go and say thank you to David D.R.A. There's several of you guys out there, for your ongoing donation, and to James McGee. Thank you guys, much appreciated. I do love those ongoings. They give you a sense of well-being even when there's something about them that means I shouldn't rely on man, right? But I do appreciate you guys, and my producer is enabled. So, when you're reading Hale's book on Vermeer, and let's get back to this whole discussion of what we're going to be doing today, and we're going to walk you through a demonstration by Max Meldrum, as you can see, and what you're going to see him do is something a little closer to what Hale called a rub-in, and I'm just going to show you what he's doing as best I can do it. Oh, my disclaimer, of course, is this, that I'm not a student of Max Meldrum in person or any of his students. So my interpretation is one that's strictly coming to you, as everything I talk to you does, through what my eyes tell me, okay? And there's a comparison between what I do and what you can find also in Boston School, in the Boston School starts that I've shown you online, one of these videos. I think it's called Lay In or Start, but if you look around for that, you'll find a number of good images. It'll give you a slightly different feel for a start. Their goals are really quite similar, though, is to have great color and great drawing simultaneously, and the entire visual impression to be well regulated. All the elements of the visual impression to be seen as a whole, and all the parts well related to each other. Okay, so those processes, that thing that they're doing, both that they're doing, is just enough different to help give you sort of a bigger handle of ways that one might attack the same problem. And I think probably that's all I need to say to get this thing started. So look at some images. Let me give you this first. Actually, let me give you the image, and then I'm going to walk you back and I'll go back to this again. But there's the image on the right. Now, it's going to be a photograph on the left, and this is found in the book. I didn't bring this out, and the fact is there weren't color reproductions, so we're going to only do this, sadly enough, we're going to only do this with values, which is about 3/4 of color anyway, if you want to put it that way, in terms of the importance. I think technically you would say it's a third, values, intensity, and hue. But without values, you don't go anyplace in painting. You really have to have your values. So color, you can be weak and strong. You can sometimes be stuck with a brilliant field, and you can't begin to approximate the brilliance, but you can still get the visual order, which is a values model, right? So what you're seeing here, though, is a lay-in. You can see it's loose. You can see it's sort of maybe semi-small brush. Mark, mark, mark. You see that sort of very much resembling a Monet model. And you'll see he didn't draw previous lines. He's working from the masses into the drawing, okay? But let me just show you what he says at the beginning. The first image reveals a humble attempt, and I assume this is his language, to convey the dominant characteristics of tone and form contained in the subject on the left side of the plate. So the left side of the plate, that's the left picture, right? So let's look at that again. There's the picture on the left. So what he's trying to do is get the right side to look like the left side, right? I don't know why he couldn't have done, I guess it probably been an expense thing, why he couldn't have done that in color in those days. That was considerably more expensive. So he's attempting to convey the dominant characteristics of tone and form. And form, keep remembering that form means shapes. It means, that thing that takes a form. And it's used multiple different ways. I'm just assuming, based on what he says here, that he means by that shapes more than anything. But multiple ways to mean that in complex ways. Then he says, as defined, they are seen here as a few irregular light disturbances contained in the lower left side. Now, he could easily have said this great mass of dark with light disturbances in it. The shapes and placings of these major disturbances, that's his word for what I call light effects, but these major disturbances were defined in relation to the outer edges of the canvas. That means he's composing, according to the viewfinder, the sight finder, whatever many people call them different things, in relation to the outside edges of the canvas and revealed by an approximate degree of darkness. Now that, in the beginning, begins to look like he's using a relative degree of, dark is such and such, and the light is such and such. He's just by choice, and he didn't pick a very dark at the beginning, did he? And so you're going to see him getting increasingly darker. That's not one of the things I do, but if you do spot around colors like Monet, you're not going to have the full value for a while. And that was the way I was trained by Bragman. You're going to only gradually get to your darks. So. But on the other hand, what you see him doing is talking about the spotting. We call this the spotting, the placement of these light spots. They're crude, and they're not drawn as objects at all, right? They're just blobs with some sort of a little bit of a hint of shapes and that sort of thing. And I think of this as the rub-in model, where you cover the canvas, but you don't have much by way of drawing. I prefer the other model, as you see, if you look at my demonstration at the last two live streams. You'll see that I approach it just differently by a little bit. But remember, there's just two things. One is the great masses and the great movements of their values and colors, intensities, and the spotting and those action players in their visual order. And so what you can see him beginning to do, even on this one, is he's beginning to approximate, right here, the strongest this is the leading edge, right? This is the strongest edge in this picture, right? Now, there's multiple ways to do this. So some of the things he's doing is he's dealing with this exit. He's talking about placing these things in relation to the frame. So that's a big deal. One of the things that bothers me about this photograph is that he's placing this in relation to the frame much closer to the right side than the photograph is. So I have a feeling that somebody just shot this photograph or cropped this photograph badly. I say that, but I actually think he may have missed, because all the way through this thing, you keep seeing that tree over here, where if I'd moved the whole thing over, it would have cropped most of that tree. So who knows? Who knows? Now, some people could say, well, why didn't he blob that light in up there? He's got the other lights all over the place. And you can argue that too. For my money, it's one of the players, right? And I'm looking for the ensemble of those kinds of players. That would be a more complete addressing of the spotting. But in any case, he's getting around, and these will be inevitably color values, right? This isn't going to be a black and white screen that he's going to put color onto, okay? Now, I'm not speaking as a Meldrum student. There are those books out there. One's called See It Painted, I think. I forget who the two authors are. I think maybe a guy named Percy Leeson wrote one book and then somebody else another, and I don't know which is which. Dominic will have to send us an email and remind us. All right, so you can see that what's happening is you're working from the outside, and the greater mass is gradually moving in to the drawing. Classic training that you would have gotten from many an impressionist. So each stage was defined and tested to determine how far it had succeeded in making the painting more interchangeable. Now that's one of those points I make to students all the time. You make whatever points you make, and but you keep watching to see if it actually feels like it's essentially doing what the other thing is doing, what the original is doing. So this is the slice we call nature, right? This guy's not working from a photograph. And don't you work on photographs. There's no reason to. There's actually much more magic to be had when you don't. And your limits aren't such that you actually look like a weak player, that you look like you needed a photograph. You're going to be more impressive. Yeah. Leave it at that for now. A different discussion. So you follow what he's saying. Determine and tested to determine how far it has succeeded in making the painting more interchangeable. That is, say, more like this is that. This is that. Even in early phases, I talk to students and say your work ought to look like essentially it is this. It should appear that way at all points in the painting, even when you're in a rough stage. And then he says, in passing from one stage to another, the greatest difficulty consisted in trying to resume the state of impressionist virginity in which the work was started. Now remember, that word relates to the word innocent, the innocent eye, or the naive eye. Impressionist virginity, I've never heard that before, but he's taking, the word state got messed with there. Or stage, to resume the stage of impressionist virginity. But in any case, what he's saying is you need to continually remember not to think of these things as objects, okay? Nothing more than that. That's what that is. Color relations, value relations, spot, locations, and light effect, edge relations, right? And then he says the power of viewing a painting objectively at each stage in the development can only be acquired after much practice. But that is the key thing, to not get so involved. And unless you think of it as objects and you start feeling pride in your skills, the more objective you're going to be at all stages, because it will be just a dispassionate correlating of data. Not dispassionate in the sense that it's in any way blocking that inner sensation you have of what it is you love, and that thing you're trying to reproduce is more than just the junk next to you, but it's a sensation, which is also full of that innocence. It's just going to be created by the eye visiting all these things without prior knowledge, except the idea of darker, lighter, more red, more yellow, more blue, etc., higher, lower. So let's just go to part two. You can see that what's happening here is he's evolving. He's gotten this area darker, gradually getting this one darker. Still doesn't have that one in, but you can see that he's beginning to put in more readables, right? These are the kinds of things like the waistband on the girl. You can see that he's trying to get to the point of having leaders, visual, strong leaders. So I'm wondering sort of by the way to myself whether or not he decided as he was working on this that he wanted the woman, this figure, to be further right. I would have liked the balance probably better if she was a little bit further right. But where you see that his width here is too great for the height. Now, what you're dealing with here is that sort of thing. Nothing is presumed, but at some point you make a decision, spatial decision, and at some point it'll be that this shall be this distance from here. And you'll pick that and you'll live with that as a base point. And you'll find something like top and bottom. You'll find exits, whatever it is. But top and bottom doesn't mean that much, except that I do like to locate things like this, high points here, and something down here where I can say, and you see that exit through there, where I can say, and that shall be a distance that I'll keep forever, because I don't want this to get any closer to the top of the frame, and I want that to be about there. And of course, that's all fed by looking at the viewfinder, looking through your viewfinder. It's all informed by looking at your viewfinder. But you can see what he's doing is he's just getting around in this massy way, and he's doing color movements, color value movements, keeping the big masses moving, and he's creeping up on the drawing. Classic, old, in my view, early Impressionist thinking. So here you can see him doing more of the same thing. You see he's staying away from actual drawing. He's sort of pecking at the general location by alluding to it. I'm not a big fan of doing that, but on the other hand, is that the way that works? But in the meantime, you can see that he's beginning to work on other top players. Remember, he's talking about these. He is after this, and he's going to be after this. As you can see, this stuff over here, he's going to be after these guys that are the top readers. He's going to. You see him chasing those down first, just the way we do, except that we set it up right away as part of the discussion of the color relations, and that's I do personally. And that's just an interesting other way to think about it. I'm not going to give any extra credits to him or to me for doing it the way we do it. I just find that I have to find my best practices. One of the things that I didn't like about this phase is I was surprised to see how much light he has down in here. Whereas if you were just blurring your eyes at this thing, this would be a large middle tone. And he does tend to think of this thing as, in that grand sense of the blurred eye and all that sort of stuff. And the only other thing I can say that bothers me even a little is this lack of a presence of this thing up here as part of the discussion if I'm all over the place at once, and that is the Boston School model. Hey, I want to do another disclaimer, and that is that everything I'm doing is to talk to you about and sell, as it were, the Boston School model or my own thinking, right? So Max Meldrum is rather like us. He's following the same sorts of things, but there's variations. But so I continually am talking about this from the point of view of what I have personally experienced and what I strive for, not just simply trying to. I can't be the interpreter of Max Meldrum. Somebody else who studied with his students or whatever it might be. And you're welcome, by the way, to get back to me on any of this, any of you guys. But I'm not trying to be the correct guy. Remember, I'm trying to show you what I see with my eyes. So, all right, good. By the way, these placements here, these are all very, very good placements. If you know the sense of how much they give you in terms of the placements on the page, I'm saying when you have at the edge of a board and you can say I can knock off this much here, go over to about half and get that piece there, and then et cetera. These are all good, very good exit material, just as much as this is. All right. So I don't know what else I can say, except you'll see that he's not just not drawing around things everywhere. He's taking this in visual order, in what I'd call the order of the edges, the New World order of the edges. Here he's moving along. And now one of the things you will find, and let's look at this, he's finally brought this in. That's really what I would have expected, at least by this time, if not sooner, right? The Boston School guys are all over the canvas, and so is he, but they're all over the canvas making some noise when it has noise to it. It looks like he may have rushed this a little bit, or something was different in the lighting. Photographs, you never know if this photograph actually is what his eyes were seeing. So you got to be cautious about judging him too quickly about, so his values are off. It's impossible stuff to sort out. On the other hand, he's gotten down here with some very sharp corners, and again, and the sharpness of the edge is not insignificant. You see the top of this edge here, like this one. This is the sharper edge. Notice that whenever you have a block, don't be presumptuous, right? This is the leading edge. I talk about that all the time. That's the one that you're really trying to use to relate other things to. And so you'll find a similar thing down here with some of this, secondarily. And then, but going around, you'll keep seeing that he's trying to maintain some sort of an order of the edges. This is probably a place, once you've done something like this and this, you might have to go back to this and reinvent it and strengthen it, because it's actually got more visual eyeball presence than this does. And here again, it feels like his values here could have been, the general value of that area could have been demoted, a little bit diminished. But this, you can see how it's developing, though. And so this is an all over the place at once model now. It's much more similar to what the Boston School guys will be doing. At this point, they could almost be mutual backgrounds. In certain ways, obviously, they are. So here it is again. So I probably don't even have to keep talking. You probably can pick up all the rest of this stuff here. You'll see the evolution of the strong center. If your center isn't strong, whatever is strong is what should evolve first, right? The leadership, the indubitable, inevitable, the proper leadership of the power players, this hard edge. So I would love to have seen this one come in a little earlier, maybe with that point up there. and maybe not much earlier than this one, or this one, but it certainly has a greater strength than this one right now. By the way, one of the values of me talking about this, even if that photograph isn't what it really is, I can tell you what I would have done if the photograph were what's true. And that's why I was talking about why this area down here is so brilliant, and in nature. That's one of those things when you're looking too, by the way, you've got to be able to not just be alarmed by this glare that you might get by a strong backlight, but you have to blur down your eyes and see what it disappears with, what it conjoins, what it becomes part of, what bigger value mass. It tends to, right? It tends to weave into or maintain association with, or be part of. You'll notice all these things are values. The lightest light, maybe the second lightest, maybe the third, and so on. These are always, maybe there's some down here. All these things are in a particular order. There's a values order to this thing of the lights, right? And that all needs to be handled. And then there's the order of the edges, and that needs to be handled in concert, right? Rather than having so much noise here, I would probably prefer to have some precise noise over here, something better. But this is all similar, very similar, so similar that you wouldn't gainsay anything he's doing. And here's another one. You can see the same evolution. You'll find the well, I can't. I'd be guessing. Never mind. Let's not do that right now. There are certain lights in these things. There are ways in which photographs of paintings look different from nature when these values, for example, that value might be right on the money, or even this one. By the way the camera handles the shot of the painting versus what this shot of nature did can be very different from each other. So don't need to keep picking on that. But you can see what he's doing. He keeps on rather working hard at getting the strong, significant players up and keeps them ahead, keeps them elevated in terms of their evolution, in terms of their development. So again, remembering it's an outside-in model and all the rest of that. That conversation he keeps having, though, about watching the whole, watch the whole, watch the whole, that's so big, and you've got to make yourself do that. At some point, let me see if I have it here. I think I do. I think at the bottom of this whole thing, so I can get back to the right one in a second. There it is. He says, what does he say here? If each time you make a comparison, you could look at your work as though you'd never seen it before, you would unfailingly detect the biggest, and what do we call it? The biggest difference. What we call it is the biggest back straggler, right? Here I am jumping back up again. Let's see if I can get myself back into where we were. All right, so we passed that. Yes, we're here. And you can see in this one, he's starting to diminish this area here, diminish this effect here. One of the things I found is if you blur your eyes, you can see which part of this to draw and which part of it you can tie on, and that's what I'm trying to say. But that idea of the back straggler, it's a pretty big deal. So you're watching the general impression of the world you're looking at with a blurred eye, and you look at yours with your painting with a blurred eye, and you should be able to see which part doesn't hang together. That's when you might see a mass like this wanting to fuse more into the back, into the darks. This whole right section of this wants to fuse more, very much like this wants to fuse more if you're blurring your eyes. The blurring of the eye is just a huge thing. You don't even want to think about trying to escape from that. All right. But you can see, even though he's hanging on here, if you blur your eye at this, you can see that the value of this whole mass coming through here has a unity to it, right, in nature here. And again, let's not jump to conclusions. He may have been dealing with bad photographs in both cases. But if this is the way I was working, and this was truly what we were working from, then this dark here, I would have blurring my eyes, I would have had this all conjoining and coming right through into this and articulating this effect with the lesser edge over there. You follow that idea? Yeah. It's much like what he's done right here. In this passage here, he's just let those run on, right? He's articulated certain things, and he's let other things run on. And that's very much what we do. You find your top players and you fuse other things as very best you can so that you're not getting lost in drawing things whose time hasn't come, right? And the general impression, at least the general impression of what hangs together with a blurred eye is going to be true all the way through. And again, he wants you to keep on looking this thing with a fresh eye. Keep thinking fresh eye. Yeah. Is there anything else in here I might say to you? One one of the things I'm talking about by effect here, it's an interesting thing. He talks about the general tonality. So he thinks of this like a checkerboard as being one dark gray. And then what he's going to do, rather like Sargent, if you think this is a big middle tone, general tonality, then in one part there's going to be a dark, another part's going to be slightly lighter. But he says in his book, he thinks in terms of big general unities. What is the general value of that mass there? So I do that generalization, but I power up this edge, so I'm never making a false contrast. I want that right edge. That's the key. That's the power player in this area. So, yeah. Would that you guys were here with me talking now so I could hear your questions and discussion points. I'm not a big fan of cutouts like this. Busyness, this area is busy. I like the busyness, but I'm not a fan of making it look like a big leaf cutout. Well, on the other hand, in laying this in, you might find easily there's a point or two that has to be articulated. It will give you a little bit of noise. But the general impression of that, I wouldn't have cut a shape around it like a maple leaf or something like that. I wouldn't have done that. In any case, yeah. So that's that. But you can see his values are now all the way down. I don't know. They were already getting seriously dark. This looks like a different photograph again, different problem with the lights. So maybe there, and then you can see that he's already he's got the full values. The values are really moved down deep enough so he can really power up his lights. Remember, in the values world, to get light effects, you only can go so dark with our pigments, and you can only go so light. You can't get any lighter than your white canvas, the white of a white canvas, or the white of whatever medium you're using. So flake white or titanium or whatever. We used to use what was that? Permalba, which we found just once we got to flake, we thought, what the heck were we painting with this gray for? It's cheap, but that's why we were doing it, I guess. Yeah, in any case, I don't exactly know why he broke this up here now that he's in this phase here. But again, he's really trying to give force to the light, right? And weakening this there as a general tone slightly in relation to this. And you can see in general now, again, this could very well be not that bright. That could be the photograph. But in any case, we'll live with his statements for that as far as that goes. In some ways, it's odd what he's doing down here because he's starting to paint details, as you might say, this way, but he's still not giving me the power base, which is really what I want. I want that thing down there talking to this noisemaker, this noise, the strong players talking to the strong players. That, to me, is purely the visual order. That's what that means. It means there's all these guys that are up there making the first noise when you blur your eyes down. Paint as if you're coming out of a fog is a Boston School idea. And that's the one thing I would have done differently. And you'd see that if you blur your eyes at these, that'd be the first thing I really needed to do is lose some of these sharp edges where they shouldn't be there, and so on. But yeah, he's just doing a number of things that I'm not. Someone else might be more conversant with what he's saying. Someone else out there with the background, with why he does this and leaves that, and so on. Again, he's slowly getting back to this. Now, again, if I'm blurring my eyes, I'm more interested in maybe the silhouetting bottom of this edge, maybe, and then the general unity of this whole thing with this, even gradating rather into this. If you blur your eyes just a ton, you'll see the significance of this edge, not just of that dark thing, but of the joint where the form hits something like the shadow line, right? So that's a soft edge where this all tends toward a middle tone mass and hangs together. For the time being, it hangs together more right here. And then, of course, as I was saying before, this part here, I just don't need that little skinny little line in there, and that would, and by the way, this is a demonstration. You're always painting faster than you ought to and doing things that are just a little outside of your the calm demeanor you want to maintain, the staying within yourself thing. When he says it's staying objective, though, by the way, just keep on looking at this thing as if somebody else painted it. Just keep on doing it. And you'll find there's something, like even right now, this head has become a back straggler. It's got a different form than this one. That's a shape thing. Now, remember, in our world, the values can be back stragglers. The edge relationships can be back stragglers. And when you have a shape made, an actual form, what they call form, that can be a back straggler. Anything that shows up on the page, if it's out of sync with the whole, it can be too big. In this case, the gesture is just flat wrong. It's angling out this way when it should be angling up this way, right? So the tilt of it is just wrong. Nothing to. This is just goes in the he's demonstrating his way of working. I like the way he uses the word humble. We every time you're up there demonstrating, you are humbled. Inevitably, you sort of have to try to explain things that you wish you hadn't done a second ago, that don't quite fit in with your theory and your way of working. Not much, but there's enough of that. Yeah. So, and again, I don't follow why he's making that big light there. So I don't know if there's something else that moved into the room. There's a mirror there or something like right there. But so I'm not going to say any more about that. Again, you can see that he's improving all the time these kinds of areas here. And I suggest to you, once you get your canvas covered, that the area, the visually dominant area, needs to be, at the minimally at least, to be the best interpreted area, and it needs to hold its own in terms of its power. It needs to establish the power for the rest of the entire painting. And then I say nobody else gets past that. That point is set and maintains as the area of greatest development. You want to keep it as the area of greatest development as you go along, because it's got all that visual power. It's also got more interest in the rest of it, strong interest, in one area, in one small area. This has interest too, but it's not as powerful as this. All right. And so here he is. He's moving along pretty good here now, having made some of the adjustments I was looking for, right? Powering these guys up even stronger, maintaining the strength of his bigger effects. Starting to lose this a little bit, as you can see. Again, this is a backstraggler kind of an area. You do wonder again sometimes when you see a demonstration whether the day has changed on them, because you know that if you're in the middle of a day and suddenly big clouds are coming in, all of a sudden you may not notice it for 2 seconds. Not a normal thing, but another thing I like to see in my own work, though, again, this one here, I like to see this one tied to that one right away. I don't want to have this as 2 or 3 things. If you could have this is an Angian conversation. He says, why would you make this out of 1 or 3 different things if you could make it out of one big one? What I say when I'm saying make it out of one big one, here's this light becoming a middle tone, just oozing into a middle tone. And if you blow your eyes, you could say it just sort of then breaks off, but it feels like one movement. Breaks off, meaning a chunk of it breaks off. But you can see it as being a light into middle tone movement. And if you can express that bigger, you're going to be able to you won't be dealing with subplot and a lot of putting time into places that you don't need to put time into. But you can see that he's moving pretty nicely along here. He is creeping this width in here, so whatever. And but this is still maintaining this really wide thing, which is why I think this picture should have gone out further. Even the length of this stuff tells me that this picture should have been cropped out to the left. So just giving him a break here. As I said, from the very beginning, it looks like this was his boundary line over here, but for some reason we didn't get the photograph to take this all in. But in nature, he's obviously got that coming in. And it affects some widths too. But let's not go into that further. All right. As you can see, everything is now coming along, everything that reads seriously, this kind of stuff. So now he's selling you, he's convincing you that this really wasn't as powerful as it looked at the very beginning. That in fact, this is the leader, and these guys down here are the leader, much more so than that. And but you can see the feeling of the third dimension is always one of those things that are characteristic of this way of working. That feeling that things are out, things are forward, and other things are back. It's very interesting because there's no effort to do perspective except in the terms of the shapes being true on a screen, as if they were traced on a screen. It's the only thing that would have anything to do with what we call perspective. What Moore last week was calling perspective drawing or perspective seeing. So, yeah. So, but as you can see, now we're at the place where you can see the bottom line. He said that. And now this stuff is now fused to that. This is still a strong thing here. And again, it almost looks like he doesn't blur his eye. I do wonder whether there's some light coming on the backlight, causing this to be different from time to time. We'll just pretend it was a student sitting there who got up and stood in a different place or something. This is starting to come around in a different way. But remember the general impression, the minute this starts feeling like it's the oddest part of this area, remember the all over the place at once model allows you to be anywhere because it may be having an impact on other parts of the painting, okay? All over the place at once model. Then I think this is the last version of this. Would I be right? Yeah, that's the last look at this. And again, you can see it's really beginning to hang together. As I said, from the beginning, I try to set up the values as close as I can, the darkest and lightest lights. But inevitably, when you in the first wave, you can't cover the canvas with your darkest darks really effectively and stay loose. So the darkest darks won't be as dark as they're going to be. But then the minute I go over and start making effects, I use real values to produce real effects. And I use that moment when this here meets this to finalize the beauty of the color relations, to actually finish off that great sensation the color is producing to the eye. So yeah, you've heard that from me in the previous conversation. So between these, maybe you can begin to get your head around a couple different ways of approaching the impressionist model, the appearance-based painting model, and find yourself a way to work. The part you can't get out of is skill. You have to have confidence in your skills at placing a thing like this between here and here and getting it in the right place. Placing something like this between here and getting it in the right place. You have to be good at getting proportions, right? You have to be practiced at getting the proportions of this to this to this, shall we say. And very much, as I was saying in the last video about ovoids, you have to be good at getting the widths to heights. Now, he appears to be off a little bit here with this width to height thing, right? Overall, this appears to be a little bit wide to this, right? But whereas before I would have been showing you this as being significantly off by its tilt, it's now, he's pretty much adjusted that thing, right? So, but that is the other thing to keep in mind, this waistline here. You could say this goes up here, over here, and down here. How does that gesture and tilt work, right? Do you see that? So this appears like maybe it's a little too short for that length. On the other hand, this is not the length that it is in the photograph, so you can get over that. You can sometimes shorten it by going to here, but remember you have linear proportions. This is just halves, quarters, things like that, with every possible permutation. And then you have what I call box proportions, just height to width proportions, and you've got to be good at those things. The next thing you have to be good at, though, is correcting your shapes and being able to make a shape. We, the Boston School guys, and by the way, you can argue this is done both ways by all of us at all times, but instead of going around chunking on angles, we tend to draw, especially when I'm pointing at my favorite of the guys, the Joseph de Camp, he tends to be a little more like Sargent to articulate a long line with a sweep and not chunk, chunk, chunk all the time. But you'll see Sargent doing both. There are times for each, but not so much so that the construction, let's say the angles own the picture, and it begins to look like a style rather than having nature dominate. But you have to be good at shape making. You have to be good at getting angles right to other angles. You have to be able to to get, say, the height of this to be right to the length of that, right? Just simple inline things like that. But shape making, however it happens, this kind of stuff into here, this kind of abstraction right here, if you're going to call it the negative shape, those kinds of things, you want to do these things and be skilled and not intimidated by them. Mostly, by the way, you get an idea of what that thing looks like, that negative shape, shall we say. And you notice, if you're looking at the whole, you'll notice what part of it, the whole of that area, you notice what part of it is least like. And all you have to be able to do is take some section like this and just move it over slightly and bring this back into unity. I mean, in a sense, I've said before that drawing is as much recognition, as it is have some brilliant thing you do with a point of a brush. Your job is to get to where you recognize the shape, and those shapes all have to be adjusted. You can put down the most beautiful continuous shape you want, and it won't be true. So you'll have to do a little smaller section of it. But that is an approach I prefer to take. That's to paint this thing like from right around here and paint it all the way down to here. Then you'll say, oh yeah, but this should have been further over. And now you can articulate just this much and tie it back onto here. And so we work from the greater to the lesser, from the bigger line, and then do smaller and smaller subdivisions. I don't know what else I can say to you all. The first phase of this thing is all about the big relationships of the big things. And as you get to the final phase, every little thing can be yours. And what we do in the Boston School visual order mindset is we work on that blurred eye group, that when your eyes are blurred like heck, dominate the thing and get those things really well regulated to each other. And then, as it were, open your eyes. It's coming out of a fog means now you open your eyes more and you see what the next layer of visually strong players are. And you keep working with those things all over the place at once, all of which have lots to do and are related to, need to be corrected by and to correct the stronger guys before them, et cetera, right? So it begins, that's why I say this begins to be rather like fractals model. You know, you're doing this great relationships, always dealing with the big points and angles the sergeant talks about, and then you go into smaller and smaller areas, and it's always again points and angles, and you know, again, I guess whatever else you do, and you just do them in smaller and smaller areas, but it's always in all over the place at once, watching the thing as a whole model. I'm thinking that's almost all you need to hear from me. On this video, I wish I could blow this up. I just took the shot of this that Shawn gave me. And by the way, thank you, Shawn, very much for this, and Ron too, for sharing it and allowing us to have it. I want to say two things. I'm doing this for my present students. I'm doing it for all of you guys out there who are thinking yourself on some level being my students, and then I'm also doing it for my intensive class. So I'm hoping that everybody who's doing my intensive workshop will have looked at this, so you have an idea of what the types of approaches that can be taken. You know, I'm not trying necessarily to reinforce or to enforce my methodology. It's just the science of the visual impression. And as I said there, I find that they're best practices depending on the painting. One thing he says is he goes around, he's got this painting, he's looking for the light spots. Well, suppose it's a light painting. You're probably going to be going around looking for the dark spots, right? So you don't have a practice that's always the same in the limited way, but it is always the same in every other way. So let's look at the rest of these quotes. His exhaust your formula, make it do all it can before proceeding to create a new one. Well, that just, to me, that just simply means go around, and these are things just out of the book that were shared with me by Shawn. But that just means when you get two or three things, work them out until they're real well related to each other, right? And then go to something else. Don't just do it in a half-baked kind of a way. You saw the second one. If you're always watching the whole, you're going to notice which part is least like. And that's even true if you only put down 3 spots. There's 3 spots in one. You look at those as a set, and one of them is still going to be out of adjustment. Deal with it. And that is the backstraggler. Keep that idea. That's what the model is, the backstraggler. He doesn't use that term. I don't think ever. Don't bother about what things look like when you're working at your canvas. Do what you mean to do in the simplest and quickest way and step back to your focusing point to see how it appears from there. Okay? A picture is finished when it looks finished. So that's a kind of a huge thing. This whole idea of debriefing, of course, is how it correlates with us. You make a mark, you go back and see how you did. You don't even think about making a mark if you don't have an idea. As you see it's a backstraggler, and you say, what is it about that? It's a backstraggler. Is that a location problem? Is that an edge light effect problem? Is that what color problem? What is that? And then you have an idea. You look at the whole and you say, oh, yeah, it should have been more chromatic. And you go out there, make the adjustment and leave. Come back and see how you did. And see if the thing is getting closer to having the harmony of the impression. Yeah, don't bother about what things look like when you're working at your canvas. Yeah, what things look like up close isn't the issue, right? I'm a fan of the idea that a picture, not the most huge fan, but that a picture ought to, especially a small picture, ought to look pretty good up close. When the average eye can see every little thing and every big thing. But the farther back, the more true it is that the painting is going to be as big and it's going to be seen from a distance. The less that's true, the less is even important at all. What little fine thing you did on some the big toe on some grand figure. But yeah, the simplest and quickest way. That's where I try to talk to you about doing. Make sure you know what the backstraggler is. It's going to be a specific thing. It's going to be a little thing. A value, a chroma, an edge, an angle. Figure out what that is. It makes it the backstraggler, and deal with it quick. Get in, get out, and then of course debrief, see how you did, and go back. So don't get too cocky. See you don't know anything about it. Say you don't know anything about it. That's the Socrates model. For all the experiences you may have had up till now, you little or nothing about your own problem. What you've had up till now tell you little or nothing about your own problem. All they do only serve to make you solve the problem more quickly. So that's the long education that you get by being in this room, trying to do this over and over. All of a sudden, there's much more that can be done with greater expediency because you have experience. But it's not out of a book somewhere. It's out of your eyes. It's out of this whole process of seeing and grasping the thing, and then begin to put down notes and watching how it's maintaining unity. So let the technical method derive from the intention. If the intention is right, you'll surely find the method. That's a beauty, isn't it? So that's why I don't find this, I could say, well, my students, I tell them from time to time, and we do this in the intensives. We work this way. We do this look. I'll go back to the very beginning of this thing. But we have this look where where we work from the outside in at times, where I say, go ahead and just give me these masses. I'm just taking its sweet time to give me that location. I didn't realize I had to put so many pictures out here. There it comes. There, but that's a working from the outside and working from the masses. And my way of working with these guys is leave a fair amount of white canvas and work from the color spots and get all these colors related, and then begin this. Then you have this process of working points in the field, points in the field, points in the field. It isn't much different from this, but you will notice that the white canvas or whatever the canvas is made of is showing through at all these edges for some period of time. That's different in my case because I don't mind if it's a big mass of light. And I try to get my skill up to speed where this whole thing here is talking to some other big thing out here, even despite, in other words, if these are strong effects, I want to be able to see them and get them well related to each other, and then allow myself to fully fill it, or to fill the area between those two things. But there's something to be said, as I said, you never know quite which you're in at any given moment. So you'll find out that if you keep on doing it X, but you don't consider both the massing and the point making, then you're not in a complete field. And what you do when is really much more about your method and what you find most effective, and or the method I have, which is the flexible method. Keep your knees bent because the method may change slightly. Okay, but the content doesn't. It's just color values and what they do in relation to each other on a canvas. And as long as your model is, relatively speaking, holding still, this is just a collating problem. And I don't want to leave it that way in too crude a way, because as the one point he's making is your intentions are really huge. So what are your intentions? And that's why I'm saying, what's your inspiration? Might be another way of saying it. Because everything you're doing, every mark you're making is trying to bring forth the beauty that you found. That's your intention, is to bring forth that magic. And that's another reason why you want to set up a still life that's a good-looking thing, right? Make sure you love what you're looking at by the time, so there's a will involved, a love, a drawing forth, a desire to be there, and an energy that you won't have just doing it perfunctorily. If you don't know how to compose well already, if you don't know how to set up a still life that has magic, some of that just doesn't happen for you. If you don't know how to get good color relations in the setup, some of that won't be there for you. So make sure that you love what you paint, and love what you see, love whatever you set up, but don't just love it. Set it up so that it's lovely, so it has that whatever it is you want to say. I just think of it as music, so set it up so it has some qualities of harmony and interrelationships that have this song to them. And I'm talking about purely visual song. I'm going to stop at that. I think I probably way overdone my welcome. Oh man, 47 minutes. All right, that's the equivalent of one of these. What do you call them? So one of these live ones. Okay, guys. Or one of the half demonstrations, isn't it? So I did that pretty fast. All right. Thank you, Mr. Producer, for your patience. Hope you find a time to do this week. And for everybody out there, thank you for subscribing, sharing, liking, and commenting. And keep commenting. Minor things. I don't care what it is. I'm working on the end, whatever the last thing is I saw. If somebody has sent something to me that I haven't discussed and you really want to discuss, please send it out there, except I give the caveat that I'm not particularly interested in discussing other ways of painting much, so I don't want to be this guy who's this historian who talks about that. I'm just talking about stuff mostly from my point of view, from the point of view of the Boston School and that thinking that's associated with this, science of appearances model. So the last thing I want to do is try to give you some deep analysis of, as you've seen me avoid before, of glaze painting, for example. I don't know anything about a lot of things in our world. And all right. Yeah, and we'll keep reminding ourselves how little we know. It's the only way to get ahead. To God. All right, great. Thank you all. And we'll see you in the next one.